Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third webinar in Sustainable Conservation's Climate Resilience in Action Spring webinar series. Thank you all for joining today. We're thrilled to have our panelists here with us to discuss how river restoration and floodplain reconnection can reduce the state's increasing flood risk while providing critical habitat and protecting communities. Before we get started, I'd like to give many thanks to our webinar sponsors. That would be Spotswood Estate Vineyard and Winery, Wilson Sonsini Foundation, and Jennifer Hernandez of Holland and Knight for supporting our spring webinar series and sharing Sustainable Conservation's vision of stewarding our state's most precious natural resources for all Californians. I'm Aysha Massell, Program Director on Sustainable Conservation's Water for the Future team. For those of you who don't know us, Sustainable Conservation advances the collaborative stewardship of California's land, air, and water for the benefit of nature and people. Every day, we bring together business, landowners, scientists, government agencies, nonprofits, and many others to advance collaborative solutions to steward the natural resources we all depend on in ways that are just and make economic sense. For over a decade, our Water for the Future team has been working on piloting and promoting groundwater recharge. For those who may be unfamiliar with this work, the idea behind flood-managed aquifer recharge, or FloodMAR, is to use excess floodwater to help replenish our aquifers. We have hosted many webinars in the past few years on the topic of recharge as an effective climate adaptation strategy, particularly to buffer the effects of drought. And if you are interested in exploring that topic more, I encourage you to browse our YouTube channel or contact us directly. In our current Climate Resilience in Action webinar series, we explore how we can work together to build resilience for a safer, healthier future in which climate change will bring more extreme wildfires, floods, and droughts. Previous webinars in this series featured leading climate scientists and representatives from NGOs, tribes, and government, highlighting the impacts of climate change and opportunities to improve forest health and wildfire resilience. If you weren't able to join us before, we encourage you to watch the first two recordings on Sustainable Conservation's YouTube channel. I think Hannah's putting that into the chat. In this webinar today, we're going to turn our focus from fires to floods. But before we do so, we'd like to get to know you, our audience. So we have 3 questions for you, so be sure to scroll down to answer all of the questions. If you don't see your answer adequately reflected, please feel free to put your answers in the chat. So we're going to launch this poll right now. It should be on your screen. And again, scroll down and answer as best as you can. So we're going to hold on for a few minutes until everyone answers. And we'll sum it up and go on from there. All right, I'm seeing about 100 participants. So far, we've got almost getting to half of you have responded. Give it a few more minutes, or maybe just one more minute. All right, give it 10 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to, I think we've ended. All right, great. So where are you joining us from today? So it looks like most people are from the Bay Area and the Sacramento Valley, followed by some San Joaquin Valley folks, and Northern Central Coast and Southern California, with a few folks from out of state. In terms of affiliation, looks like about 40% of people are actually from government agencies, about 30% of people from nonprofits, and a few from the other categories as well, including business and philanthropy. And then how would you rate your level of knowledge about the role of rivers and floodplains in reducing flood risk in California? About 60% of you said average, with some of you in the beginner realm and some of you in the expert realm. So great, thanks everyone for participating. And I'm gonna move on here. Before we get started with our panelists, I just wanna let you know that we're gonna save some time at the end for audience questions, but you don't need to wait until that time to ask your question. You can just go ahead and enter your questions or comments into the Q&A box or the chat, and we'll do our best to address them at the end. So now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our two panelists today, John Cain and Sarah Puckett. For full disclosure, I should let you know that I've worked with both of them closely before on river restoration projects. So this is really a conversation amongst old friends. John Cain is currently the Director of Conservation at River Partners. Before that, he was a Conservation Director at American Rivers. Earlier in his career, he served as a restoration ecologist at the Natural Heritage Institute and staff scientist for the Mono Lake Committee. He holds a bachelor's degree in physical geography and a master's degree in environmental planning from UC Berkeley. Sarah Puckett is the Central Valley Program Director at American Rivers. Before that, Sarah worked as an environmental consultant specializing in implementing urban creek and wetland restoration projects and advancing multi-benefit stormwater and green infrastructure projects around the San Francisco Bay and Delta. She holds a master's degree in environmental management and resource ecology with a focus on wetland ecology from Duke University, as well as a BS in environmental economics and policy with a minor in geography from the University of California at Berkeley. So John, we're going to start with you. If you can come off on camera and off mute, we'll get started. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Aysha. I'm going to pull up my presentation. Hopefully you can all see that. Yes, all presentations about the Central Valley. I will focus mostly on flood management in the context of the Central Valley, which was once described as the inland sea of California. And it in the flood of 1862, you could take a boat all the way from San Francisco to Bakersfield. So much has been written about the ecological productivity of this area, and that's why it's such an important area agriculturally today. I'm having a little trouble figuring out how to advance the slide. Do you have any suggestions for me?
Maybe use the arrow, the right arrow. Down button, down arrow.
There we go.
Perfect.
I had to just press harder. There was a great book about the topic written by Robert Kelly about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, called Battling the Inland Sea. And it's really a story about government, the state of California exerting itself as a government. Flood management was a challenge that required people to work together, different municipalities and counties to work together across a large area of California. And the gentleman on your right is William Hammond Hall. He was the first state engineer hired by the state legislature in 1878 to figure out what to do about our flooding problems. And you may know that William Hammond Hall was also the landscape architect that developed Golden Gate Park. Apparently, he showed Frederick Law Olmsted where where he proposed to develop a park for Golden Gate Park, and Olmsted told him to find a different location. Great story about William Hammond Hall. And he wrote in his report to the legislature in 1880 that there were two classes of levees in the Central Valley, those that had been overtopped by floodwaters and those that were going to be. And there was a period at that time of what they called the levee wars, with different people building a levee bigger than their neighbor's levee so it would flood their neighbors. And obviously, it didn't. That was not a pathway to success. Um, so William Hammond Hall laid the foundation for developing the first flood plan in the state of California. He said, however, that it should be fully understood that floods will occasionally come, which must be allowed to spread. That trying to contain all of the floods of the Central Valley was not going to be a successful endeavor. Um, Out of William Hammond Hall's efforts, eventually 20 or 30 years later, his mentors helped him, his proteges ended up developing the flood plan for the Central Valley that was implemented in the 20s and 30s. And this graphic just shows you the kind of maze of reclamation districts and levees and bypasses on the landscape in the Central Valley. And there's a rich institutional landscape behind all of this as well. Just to summarize, a lot of this was happening during the hydraulic mining period when sediment coming down from the mines was a big part of the problem. Levees were built not just to reclaim farmland, but to help advance navigation. And a huge amount of effort went into that. And it only started getting really implemented in the late 20s and 30s. And shortly after that was the era of large dam building. And so between the levees and the dams, we had a large period where there wasn't a lot of flooding happening. But it's important to kind of understand this historical context. And between both the levees, the dams really changed the hydrographs, the dams and diversions. And so what we're seeing here is flow on the y-axis and on the x-axis, the months of the year. And on the Sacramento Valley, we used to have peaks in the spring, and now the peak flows are often in the summertime. These are in average years, not the flood years. So we've really dramatically changed our rivers with these dams and levees. For years we didn't have significant flooding problems, but in 1986 and 1997, changes started to create flood problems. Some of those changes were urbanization of flood-prone areas that William Hammond Hall knew were going to flood. We just got lazy because we didn't see the floods coming. But the 1997 flood was truly a bigger one and was a preface to flooding. This map here on the left shows the urbanization. It was a map that students at UC Berkeley did around urbanization of the Delta, and most of this development is in what was historically floodplains. So there was in 2004, there was a large flood that flooded Jones Tract, and then in August of 2005, there was Hurricane Katrina. In 2006, there were very significant floodwaters in the Central Valley that prompted a change in course of action. But before I go there, I just wanted to point out how radically the infrastructure, dams and levees has changed the landscape in the Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley. This is a map of wetlands in the Sacramento Valley, wetlands and riparian forests on the left and in historic times. And virtually all of those natural habitats have been eliminated by development of dams and levees and agriculture. That had huge ecological impacts, but today there's a real promise of making investments that not only improve public safety, but improve fish and wildlife, improve water supply, and really help us get the most, this phrase, the most ecological outcome per drop of water. So there's this really great opportunity that we've been working on over years to advance that. That really started with the Central Valley Flood Protection Act of 2008. And that the legislature ordered a new flood plan by 2012, which has been updated every 5 years, and we're currently working on the 2027 update. It changed the board that made decisions about flood management in the Central Valley and renamed it. It requires a much higher level of protection for cities And very importantly to my group, River Partners, it explicitly authorized ecosystem restoration as part of the plan. And in fact, this is a picture of the 2022 plan, which features Dos Rios State Park, a project that River Partners has worked on for years. And it's very exciting to see this kind of nature-based solution featured. There's a wealth of information in the plans. I encourage you to take a look at it. One of the big things that the plan called for was expanding the floodways, starting by expanding the Yolo bypass, which protects Sacramento by diverting floodwaters around Sacramento instead of during a large flood, 80% of the flow of the Sacramento River flows through the Yolo bypass instead of going down the river. And the red portions on this graph, on this map, show where the Yolo bypass is being expanded to increase the amount of water it can carry and protect Sacramento. There's also, the flood plan also called for a new bypass south of Stockton to divert floodwaters around Stockton. And here we have a map of that. And you can see where the floodwaters would go in between the urbanized area. Those areas in yellow are not yet developed. The areas in red are developed. And Sarah Puckett, who's been my colleague for many years, is going to talk to you more about this new bypass, Paradise Cut bypass that's being developed. I'll just close by mentioning and inviting you all to come visit Dos Rios State Park, which is just across the river from the San Joaquin River National Wildlife Refuge. I look forward to talking more about it in the panel discussions about how it's this amazing example of multi-benefit flood management. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Wonderful. And yes, let's talk more about Dos Rios because that is a truly exemplary project that everyone should visit if you ever get a chance. Next up, we'd like to have Sarah Puckett join us. If you can come up on camera and off mute.
All right, I got the camera and the presentation, but not the mute. All right, can everyone see me and the presentation?
We can.
Great, thank you. All right, hi everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you for hosting me. I am going to be talking about two projects. One, John mentioned the Paradise Cut project, and also an urban creek restoration project in the city of Richmond. All right, just to get started, I really don't want to, I really like to define these terms that we throw around, especially for the new people who are less familiar. Just to clarify, floodplain is the area next to the creek or river that floods. And then a levee is these human-made barriers that, and the purpose of them is to reduce the frequency of flooding between the river and the floodplain. So American Rivers has been working hard across the Central Valley to reconnect the rivers and their floodplains in areas where we can. And there's a lot of areas where we can't that are highly developed. And a lot of people don't realize that they live behind levees throughout California. And John talked about the overtopping of levees in floods, but a lot of the levees actually fail from what's called seepage, where the water actually soaks through the levee or goes under the levee and causes the levee to fail.
Sarah, real quick, if you can try to just maximize your PowerPoint's view, just that
okay.
screen.
Oops.
We can kind of see your background. It's okay.
Oh, am I sharing the whole?
It just make it bigger.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on, let's see if I can do this.
If not, it is what it is, so.
Okay. I am having trouble grabbing the corners. Oh, there, hold on. There we go. Okay, is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Aysha. All right, so just wanted to show a visual here of all the how a levee really constricts these rivers, and John showed the picture of all those red lines. The levees are constricting rivers all across. They're really our flood control system in California are these levees adjacent to all the major rivers. And then one way that to reduce flood risk is to widen the corridors and to make more room for the rivers. So setting the levees back, expanding flood bypasses, and reconnecting floodplains to the rivers will not only reduce flood risk, but increase resilience to climate change. And you can just see from this photo that this can also create a really beautiful amenity to the cities that are located adjacent to the rivers. So the river is not as much of a threat, but can be an amenity. All right, so the Paradise Cut Expansion and Multi-Benefit Project is located in this, can you see my arrow here? Right here in this lower red rectangle in the southern delta. And I just wanted to point out the city of Stockton, which is really ground zero for flood risk in California. And the city of Stockton has the Calaveras River coming in from the east, the rising sea level coming in from the west in the Pacific Ocean, and the increased flows coming in from the San Joaquin River from the south. And there's been a lot of news about the risk to Stockton. In this photo, and I talk about Stockton, the larger metropolitan Stockton area includes Stockton and then two cities to the south, Manteca and Lathrop. And this was a flood in 1997 in Manteca. And also just some of these levee breaches in 2017 led to the evacuation of 500 people in Manteca. And probably more people live in this area today than they did in 2017. So one solution to reduce the flood risk in this area is as flood bypass, which not only diverts the water away from these urban areas, but also gives rivers more room to flood. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Paradise Cut flood bypass and what is it. And you can see here, I just want to orient you all. This is the San Joaquin River flowing. It flows from south to north. This is it flowing towards the city of Stockton. And this is agricultural land to the south. And then right here is as a weir, and I'll show a picture of what that weir looks like on the next slide. But it's a little area where the water can flow over when the water gets high in the river from flooding. It can flow over the weir and into the existing Paradise Cut flood area. And you can see this area is fairly small, and it's not quite big enough to make a significant dent on the flood flows in the river. So the proposal, the Paradise Cut bypass expansion project is looking at using another about 3,000 acres of land to expand this bypass into this large area and building a new weir upstream. So the river can flow over this entire area. So this is a picture of the weir. You can see the San Joaquin River flowing from south to north down here. And then when the water level rises, there's a little, like a mini levee here where there's a break in the levee and the water flows over and into the bypass. And this is an aerial view of the similar project. The purple here is the existing Paradise Cut bypass, and the green would be the expansion. And you can see the path of the San Joaquin River flowing towards the urban areas of Stockton, Lathrop, and Manteca, over 400,000 people. And as John showed, the most urbanized areas of the Delta are around the edge, and these are rapidly developing these communities. And so the idea of the Paradise Cut project would divert the waters away from these urban areas and out to the less developed areas of the Delta. And one of the greatest benefit, or one of the benefits of Paradise Cut is that it would reduce the height of the river from 0.7 to 3 feet along a 28-mile stretch of the river. So it's not in just one area that you see the impacts. And when you are talking about if you live in a house in the city of Stockton and you have 0 inches of water in your house versus 3 feet of water in your house, that's the impact that the project could have to reduce that flooding to these communities. And it also reduces the pressure on those levees that are keeping the residents in the cities of Stockton, Lathrop, and Manteca from being flooded on a regular basis. And we call this project a multi-benefit solution because it not only reduces flood risk, but it also provides about 3,000 acres of habitat benefits. So over 2,500 acres for Swainson's hawk forage, 800 acres of restored riparian habitat for the riparian brush rabbit and other native species. So this is a very large scale project that we are excited to be implementing over the next few years. It's a long way to go on this project as well. And now I'm going to switch gears and go from big to small. Oh, sorry, last slide here. Just wanted to show a picture of the Yolo bypass that John mentioned. The Yolo bypass is protecting the city of Sacramento from flooding and or reducing the risk to flooding in Sacramento. And so the Paradise Cut project would create something similar for the residents of Stockton. And you can see just the natural beauty of this flood risk reduction rather than the large cement dams and levees that are throughout California. All right, so moving into the urban San Francisco Bay Area. For the Bay Area folks, you'll recognize we have San Francisco Bay and then the East Bay up here in the city of Richmond. And we have the Ream Creek watershed outlined in blue. And this little red area is where the project is in the Rollingwood neighborhood. So this is the rough outline of Ream Creek. It's about 3 miles long. And historically, it started in the higher hills east of I-80 and then would spread out into the flatlands before it flowed sometimes and if it made it out into San Pablo Bay. And the residents of the Rollingwood community are disadvantaged. They about 25% of them do not have more than a high school education. 37% are living below the federal poverty line, and about 11% don't speak English as a first language. So this is what the housing development looked like in the 1950s. And you can see right here, this is where Ream Creek flowed. And it was labeled as a drainage ditch. So not a lot of consideration for the creeks in the neighborhood. And so this is an aerial view here. This blue line here is Ream Creek. And the north side of Ream Creek is in the city of Richmond, and the south side is in unincorporated Contra Costa County. And these folks in Richmond actually own the entire creek up until these people's property line. And also, it's hard to tell here, but these people in the city of Richmond are at a much higher elevation than the folks in unincorporated Contra Costa County. So all the slides that I'm about to show you, including this one, Ream Creek has been flooding for the last 20 years and flooding out the neighborhood that is in unincorporated Contra Costa County. So, and the folks who live in these homes would call the county and say, you know, my house is flooding. And the county would say, well, I'm sorry, but that's that flooding is coming from the city of Richmond, and they'd call the city of Richmond and they'd say, I'm so sorry, we can't do anything because that flooding is occurring in unincorporated Contra Costa County. So it was this like jurisdictional conundrum here of like who was responsible for coming up with a solution for this project or for this creek. And this wasn't just levee breaches every 5-10 years. These people were being impacted by flooding events 3 or 4 times a year every time it flooded, every time it rained. And what the reason why was this is what the creek looked like in their backyard. It was full of sediment, full of invasive species that was just, it was so choked full that when the water would come down from the hillsides, it would just spread out into the residents who lived in the county. And this is a photo that was taken before. You can see just how flat the creek is and how it's level with the property, with the residents on the left-hand side, and just how high up the residents are on the Richmond side. And then happy to show you the final creek restoration project, which was just completed in February 2025. And you can see the little baby native plants on either side of the creek. And then in February, we had a really nice, large community celebration to celebrate the completion of this project with multiple partners, the City of Richmond, Urban Tilth, the Watershed Project, and American Rivers worked together for multiple years to try to implement this project and to transform Ream Creek into a source of frustration into a cherished natural asset, which Richmond City Council member Sahila Bana summed up very nicely. And just lastly, wanted to talk about the benefits of this project. This Urban Tilth has a watershed restoration field crew where they employ young residents from that live in the city of Richmond to they grew all the native plants and helped worked with the watershed project and their green stewardship crew to plant and install them. And they'll be working to maintain this site over the next 2 years and working with the residents to help them learn how to maintain this creek in their backyard. And that is it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah and John. If both of you could come on camera. Now we're going to start our conversation. And so I see a few questions in both the chat and the question and answer. Folks, please just ask more and I'll try to collate them, but I'm going to get this kicked off with just a couple of questions that I have. John and Sarah, you both talked about, big projects, maybe more in, the valley where there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of flood risk also, as well as Sarah, you talked about small kind of community-based projects. I'm wondering if both of you could talk about what are some opportunities and challenges that you see in scaling up this work, whether it's for the large projects or the small projects. Like for instance, large projects, obviously they're big, but even the small projects, other communities face flood risk. So how do you see that you could scale up this work and make floodplain and river restoration more of a business as usual approach to flood risk reduction versus kind of a novel or niche approach?
I will go first, Sarah. There are so many jurisdictional problems. It seems like the property line or the county boundary, always is along a creek. There's a lot of infrastructure that follows creeks. It turns out that a lot of the sewage lines parallel the creek. Of course, there's regulators that are paying attention to what happens to the creek. So when you touch the creek, you touch everybody, and everyone needs to be involved. And that is a major challenge of scaling creek restoration or flood management in general. It's not enough to just do a project it gets even harder than that. It's not just enough to do a project on one property or one parcel to really make it. We all know that the water is going to flow from an upstream parcel to a downstream parcel, and we really need to do it along corridors. And that, again, just makes it more complicated. I'd say one of the big opportunities and the kind of tough nut to crack, the opportunity though, is there's so many benefits that come from it that there should be an interest in having multiple parties invest in it because it does things like carbon sequestration, it benefits pollinators, it saves water, it reduces risk, creates open space, multi-benefit. The challenge, though, is, well, who pays for what part and how we get people all working together. And this is, our governance challenge for creating a more resilient future against a changing climate.
Yeah. I'd like to echo that too. And also just a lot of the funding sources, like Prop 4, which is an amazing source of funding. It's very focused on project development, which is fantastic, but not a lot of, like, specifically calls out no maintenance, because the maintenance is a long-term issue. So you need to we partner with local entities like the City of Richmond to help be responsible to help the community with long-term maintenance, and the burden really falls on those local agencies to take on the long-term maintenance. And if they could get funding to help them out, it would increase jobs and make their cities and counties more beautiful. The other thing that I wanted to mention is a lot of these restoration projects are treated from a permitting perspective just as similar as a housing development. So we have to go through the same permitting processes as a development would, and apply for all the same permits. There's been some effort to like the cutting the green tape effort, the Sustainable Conservation has been working on to look at programmatic permits. And American Rivers is working on some bipartisan legislation right now to make it easier for FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Association, which looks at development in floodplains of like how to do multi-benefit floodplain restoration without having to go through the same process as you would if you were going to build a house in the floodplain.
That was a great summary, and if I could just build on that quickly, Sustainable Conservation's work on permitting has been really quite helpful, and this maintenance issue is a giant challenge because it's hard to get anyone to agree to do a project until you've identified who's going to be responsible for maintaining it over the long term. One big challenge with the maintenance is that often involves cutting vegetation in a wetland, and you have to get a permit for that. And so there are these pathways to potentially having advanced mitigation credits. There's something called the Regional Conservation Investment Strategies that could allow for advanced mitigation credits to really facilitate, once you develop these projects, the long-term management and permitting of it over time. And Sustainable Conservation has really been at the vanguard of that. Thank you.
Yeah, our accelerating restoration team here at Sustainable Conservation's worked with a lot of partners in developing that streamlined approach. So there's many folks probably on this call who have worked on that as well. Yeah, there's a lot of questions here, and I'm trying to kind of clump them together. Maybe on this topic of permitting is actually a big, anyone that's worked in restoration knows that permitting is a big sticking point, or can be a big sticking point. And so have you seen, or what kind of advancements have you seen recently with agencies kind of understanding the multiple benefits of these types of floodplain restoration, flood risk reduction? They don't quite fit into flood risk reduction only or habitat only. And have you seen instances where this has really worked well from a permitting agency standpoint? And where do you think there may be some room for improvement in getting these types of projects kind of through that process more quickly.
Well, I will jump in. River Partners was developing projects, riparian reforestation, so floodplain reforestation projects in the Sacramento Valley. Um, Before we met anyone at the Reclamation Board, and at a certain point, somebody showed up and said, "Oh, you need a permit to do that. You're planting trees in the floodway. And if you're doing that in the Central Valley, you need to go to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board for an encroachment permit. And then they often need to ask the Army Corps of Engineers if that's okay as well. So that is a whole nother level of permitting to in floodways. Um, there is no magic. You got to go through steps to show that if you're doing something in a floodway, it's not going to impact your neighbors. And there's really no getting around that. Fortunately, the tools for doing that are getting much better. Um, and there are some innovations in trying to get the Corps of Engineers to be more flexible, but there's lots of room for improvement on that. Paul Dutchins, who was with the Contra Costa Flood Control District, had a presentation he gave called "Why I Divorced the Corps of Engineers and Why You Should Too." And you actually go get an act of Congress to deauthorize a levee is easier than going through the permitting process with the Corps. Hopefully that is changing, but that's a place where a lot of work needs to, a lot of progress could be made.
Yeah. And I don't have any specific on the ground examples that I can think of right now, but I think that the more like it's so nice, I think, now that we've been working in this space for the past 20 years and we have projects to show that have been implemented. I feel like we're not starting from scratch, and we're not we have some examples to point to of positive examples of restoration projects that have already been implemented, so that we can build on the momentum of the projects that have gone before. And I'm hoping that it's going to be easier to implement projects in the future because we've been able to have some examples of really successful projects that have been implemented over the past few years.
Great. Well, speaking of examples of projects, I know we wanted to talk a little bit more about Dos Rios. So maybe, John, you could talk a little bit about Dos Rios. I mean, like I said, it's just an amazing place. It's our newest state park. You really have to go if you haven't been there. But if you could explain a little bit how that project came to be, John, and then maybe if you see, are there other types of opportunities that have been identified that are similar to Dos Rios in the Central Valley or other places in California? And also, Sarah, you're welcome to jump in as well.
Dos Rios, now Dos Rios State Park, or it's still a proposed state park, but we're working through the final details to transfer the land from River Partners to the state park. It's at the confluence of the Tuolumne and San Joaquin rivers. And it was damaged pretty heavily by the 1997 flood. It was farmed by the Lyons family. And after the 97 flood, and then I believe, well, the 97 flood also took out some dairies across the river from Dos Rios, where the San Joaquin River National Wildlife Refuge. And those landowners agreed to sell to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service invited Sacramento River Partners, that was the name of our organization, down to the San Joaquin, and we had to change our name to just River Partners. And we helped the refuge restore 3,000 acres there at the San Joaquin River National Wildlife Refuge. Unfortunately, I don't think you can visit there because the refuge staff has had to close down access. Hopefully, it will open up again. The forest is 100 feet tall. It was only planted in 2006. It's 100 feet tall. And across the river, we got to know our neighbors, the Lyons family. Bill Lyons had been a county supervisor and director of the Department of Ag. And we're able to work on pulling together funding from different, I think, I can't remember how many different sources of government, federal and state funding to purchase 1,600 acres from the Lyons family. It took 6 years. Every agency that wanted to fund it had different requirements, which made the actual easements that we placed on it very complicated. But here we are, 10 years later, it's fully restored, and you can go visit there. There's a property next door called Hidden Valley Ranch. It's another 500 acres that we just restored, planted that last year. It's really interesting to see the contrast. So there's so many partners came together to make that a reality. And I think the reason state parks focused in on this opportunity was because the San Joaquin Valley is one of the most underserved area for parks and open space in the state of California, and has a lot of economically disadvantaged communities.
I'd love to jump in and plug another state park in the Central Valley that you may have never heard of or visited, Great Valley Grassland State Park, which is nearby Dos Rios. It is technically open to the public, but does not have a lot of public amenities. It's on the San Joaquin River, downstream of the confluence of the Stanislaus River. And we are all fingers crossed, hoping to breach a levee, and we're working in partnership with River Partners and American Rivers and California State Park on this project. John, I don't know if Aysha, you've worked on this. John worked on this project for many years, and we're about to breach a levee on the San Joaquin River, reconnecting over 200 acres of floodplain habitat with the San Joaquin River. And then there's a public boat launch, and you can park your car and you can walk around Great Valley Grasslands. It's between it's west of Merced between 99 and I-5. So if you're driving down I-5, it's worth stopping, especially in the spring. You can see beautiful vernal pools there.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up grasslands, Sarah. And I've actually have boated on that reach, and it's wonderful. It's a very peaceful area. Yeah, so it seems like, the basic idea is widening some of the river corridors all up and down California, wherever possible. This will help improve habitat, create open space, reduce flood risk. I wanted to bring up some kind of a variety of questions from the audience about a little bit the mechanics of like what happens once you do this. So for instance, there's a question of, is there any issues with trapped fish when the floodwaters go down? What about sedimentation? Is that an issue when you flood farm fields? Another question is, how if you kind of open up a choke point, does that just create a choke point downstream once you open up, on some part? And also like in terms of habitat improvement, in a river or a creek, you're trying to introduce complexity to some degree in the creek channel, some logs and woody debris. How does that relate to flood risk reduction? So it's a bunch of little questions in there. Take it as you will.
Wow, those are very good questions. I'll start with the one about the ones that are sort of like, how does this improve habitat, or how do you avoid harming the parties downstream? And one simple idea that's really built into the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan is you start the expansion of the floodway from the bottom up. So the two system-wide projects that the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and DWR, Department of Water Resources, are advancing are expanding the Yolo bypass through a variety of projects, and then also expanding Paradise Cut to be able to convey more floodwaters. Once you make the bottom of the system bigger, then you can start moving upstream. And if you're adding complexity, it's not as much of a problem because there's more room in the system. But ultimately, these come down to kind of land stewardship things. And floodplains are messy places. I had a mayor once say to me, "What, you want to turn it into a swamp?" And I had to say, yeah, that's the plan. But they provide so many ecological benefits. They do need to be managed though. And there is a management challenge on these big landscapes and an exciting opportunity. You asked about other projects. Another project that's near the bottom of the system is actually called Dos Rios Norte. And we hope and that's a 1,600-acre property at the confluence of the Sacramento and Feather Rivers at the bottom of the Sutter bypass, just upstream of the Yolo bypass. And we are working, River Partners is working with the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians to look at a role they can play in long-term stewardship and management of that property. A lot of issues to get worked out, but there's great opportunities for evolving tribes. River Partners has another project called the Willow Bend Project, about 15 miles upstream of Colusa, where we're pretty far along in the process of dedicating that to the Kahil Dehi people, Winton people in the vicinity of Colusa.
And I guess I would answer just saying that every single project is different. There's not one. Every project has their own issue, their own opportunities, and their own constraints. Like the Paradise Cut flood bypass project, it's right near the pumps that transport water down the California Aqueduct and the Delta Mendota Canal to provide water for Southern California and the farmers in the Central Valley. So we're not going to design the project with a lot of benefits to attract fish to that region. The habitat benefits are going to be for the riparian brush rabbit and Swainson's hawk, and kind of focusing more on the habitat that we can restore. And then River Partners and American Rivers are working on a project called River Garden Farms, or Turning Point Preserve, where we're lowering the floodplain along the Sacramento corridor, where we're hoping to lower a historic floodplain low enough so that it'll provide rearing habitat for juvenile salmonids who are migrating up the Sacramento River. So that one's going to be not 100%, but very fish focused, and a more regular connection between the river and the floodplain, where Paradise Cut is going to be connecting the floodplain and the river just on flows of about, I think it's like the 10-year flood.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, thank you for kind of pointing out the differences between different sites, of course, different considerations, as well as kind of like the long-term maintenance that you mentioned, John, is very important, or the stewardship, as you say. We only have a few more minutes, so really quickly, this is a chance for you both to plug your organizations, and then just leave just a minute or two for me to just close out. But just a final question for both of you. How can people get involved in the work that you're doing in restoring floodplains and reducing flood risk in California?
John, you want to go first?
One thing you can do, one positive thing you can do, is capture all of the water that falls on your property. If you have a property where you can do that, and then just pay attention. What happens when it rains? Where does the water go? I am amazed by how many of my neighbors have figured out how to get all of the water off of their property, and then it goes on the other neighbor's property. And so it's really about be hydrologically considerate. That's a place to start. If you're interested in this, find out if there's a local creek group that you can get involved and help advance this forward. Sarah and I worked with local creek groups, and we love it. River Partners loves it to have local partners come out and say what they think. And it's hard to get locals to engage in these complex projects. So raise your hand, go to a meeting, and encourage groups like Sustainable Conservation, American Rivers, River Partners, and so many others that are trying to push these along.
And Sarah, 1 minute or less?
Uh, yeah, I just put, I totally agree with everything John said. You probably live near a local creek and get involved in that group. American Rivers also just launched it's called the it's been going on for a while. It's called the Natural Floodplain Functions Alliance. And we're having a webinar series, and it's features projects like this all across the country. And one of the things that I've been working, we've been working in California for so long, and I just love learning from projects that are happening across the country. I think there's a lot that we can learn from other rivers and other creeks. So encourage you. I put the link in the chat there.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah and John, for joining us today and sharing your expertise. Really interesting work that you all are doing, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. We'll be sending the recording soon in case you missed anything or would like to revisit the discussion. And I just want to plug the next webinar in the series. It's going to be in June, and we'll focus on drought resilience. So stay tuned to our emails or follow us on Eventbrite to hear when the date and panelists get announced. So just finally, if you'd like to follow or support Sustainable Conservation's work, you'll see more information on the screen here. Thank you all again for tuning in, and many thanks to our great panelists. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.